All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. It's me, Dr. Asia. We're back in the house. We're back recording. It's an early Sunday morning. Well, not that early, but sleeping in is always good on a Sunday. We are post election. It is January the 26th. It's been a week, and I think that this is Keisha Rembert is a perfect guest to have on as we're talking about what it means to be an educator in really Trump's America right now and the work that she does. And we'll talk about that. But so excited to have you listening to our podcast or watching it on YouTube. Keisha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a week and I appreciate this reprieve.
Yeah, it's been a week and we have work to do. And Keisha and I had this like long conversation before we even push record about like, how are we really, right? Those of us who support folks in DEIJ, folks who work on belonging and inclusivity in community. Like, what does this mean for us that don't work necessarily at the federal level, but get funding from the federal level? So yeah, we'll definitely jump into that later. But we always want to start with that first question, which is like, before January 26th, years ago, you started in education. So the question I want to start off with asking you is, what was the situation, the person that helped you decide it was that education was for you?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I was in thinking about that, there isn't just one person, there are like many people. So I am from a lineage of educators. My auntie Anne was one of the first Black educators to integrate Chicago public schools on the north side of the city. And so there's a beautiful image of her in a classroom with children of all races and creeds, and she is sitting with a book. And I've remembered that image. That image has always stuck out to me just because of who she was, just um,
Mm-hmm.
such a confident, beautiful, caring woman who, even after she left Chicago Public Schools to start a home daycare, had her former students come to Inglewood in Chicago. And if anyone is familiar with Chicago, and if you're familiar with Inglewood, you know that not too many people that don't look like me and Dr. Asia are going to be in Inglewood. And so many people brought their children to her house to be educated in her
Yeah.
house. So I think that I always like to start with that legacy and my ancestors because it means so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't grow up wanting to be a teacher, quite frankly.
You won't
Again,
be the
I'm
first person on the show to say that.
girl, like I was like, oh, I grew up in Chicago. I want to be Oprah Winfrey. I was like, show me the money. I want
Yeah.
to talk. I want to share. I want to be in front of a camera. And I went to school. And majored in undergrad English journalism. And a lot of the times, because I did like to talk and ask questions, and at one point told my parents I wanted to be a professional student because I just loved learning, I ended up taking over a lot of professors' classes.
Oh
And
wow.
so I had so many of my professors say, you would make a great teacher because you just flick and took over my class. And I was like, no, they don't make enough money. That is not for me.
Yeah.
And I had a couple internships while I was in Boston finishing up undergrad in journalism and just found out it wasn't for me. So that's the benefit of being able to be in a field before you fully commit. And so I remember leaving school and thinking, what am I going to do? And one of the things that I did was I started substitute teaching because what can you do with a college degree and you still don't know what you want to do? So I started
Mm-hmm.
subbing and I was like, oh, I do remember this little thing that people was telling me that I would make a good teacher. And that one thing led to another. I ended up finishing, going to get my master's in education through an alternative certification program, which you took a course and then the next term they threw you in your whole classroom with whole human
Oh
beings
wow.
after one course.
Oh
And
wow.
I remember thinking, oh my goodness. And I was in middle grade, a middle grade teacher. So not just like the kids who would call you out because you didn't know stuff, and I did not know stuff, and who were
Yeah.
calling me out because I didn't know stuff. But actually, it was the best place that I could have been. Like those we taught each other. I feel bad, and I'm gonna say this to my first couple of years of students. I'm sorry. You were
Oh,
my guinea pigs.
listen, I've said this on the show so many times. I've said, I don't know, that first couple years, I don't know what I was doing. I mean, and I remember my first day of school, this boy, his name was Deshaun, his mom walked in and she's like, "Are you a first year teacher?" And I said, "Yeah." You could see her face that she was just so disappointed, but she gave me a chance. And now, now as a having an 11-year-old and
Hmm.
knowing like I don't want my kid to have a
Yes,
first year
yes,
teacher,
yes,
that we're full of energy, we're full of ideas, but there's these these situations that we just don't know how to navigate. But anyway,
yes.
I hear you on that, and I know a lot of educators in that are listening to this or watching this 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and I thought it was me. See, I thought it was just me being in this alternative certification program. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
know what I'm doing. So, I mean, we're all learning together. But again, I think that helps me because like I said, I've always been an eager learner. So, I remember after that first year, I was like, "Oh my goodness." I just stopped and reflected and was like, I didn't I I got some learning to do. And I remember that summer being knee deep in books.
Hmm.
Um, Somebody gave me Henry Wong or Harry Wong something, and
The first
I
days of
the
school.
first days of school, and
Yes,
I
yes.
ate that book up, and
Same.
then I like reached out to people who had been in the field because up until that point I was like, I know what I'm doing, and then the end of the year was like, no, you really didn't. No, you
Yeah,
really didn't.
that
And
ego.
so reached
Hmm.
out to elders and folks who could just give me advice. And some of it was great. Some of it was not so great. I remember somebody telling me, don't smile for the first 3 months of school.
Oh
And I was
yeah.
like, okay, that is not who I am as a person. So I tried it. And like the second half of the day, I was like, I can't do it no more. I was like, it
Yeah.
wasn't even a day in. And I'm like, I can't do this. This isn't who I am. So it was, just figuring out who I am as a person and what not what I wanted my students to know, but what they wanted to know and what they needed to know. And so
Hmm.
I think that perspective changed who I was as an educator and actually helped me in ways that I don't think if I had gone through the traditional um, teaching pathway that I would have gotten to. So that's how I ended up in a middle school classroom and wouldn't trade that experience for the world. I like to say I'm a forever middle school teacher. I love the
Yeah.
drama. I love the gossip. I love the YA. I love all things young people.
Yeah, you are a good one. So many folks. I also taught middle grade. I taught fourth, fifth, and then sixth for 6 years. There's a special place in my
Mhm.
heart for anyone who teaches past sixth grade. Seventh graders are not the hormones, the
Mhm.
everything, and then eighth grade they level out. Um, so how long were you a middle school educator? Like, what was that journey?
So 17 years I was a middle school educator and I taught seventh
Wow.
grade, seventh grade is the middle child of the middle child. It's
Yes,
like
yes.
they are, oh my goodness. But I loved it because I also like to think I went to middle school because I was writing my own I was such an awkward kid in school during that age myself, so I was able to sympathize with them in ways and
Sure.
bring my whole silly, crazy self to the classroom, and they embraced that, and
Yeah.
then got changed to eighth grade, and I ended up loving. I love eighth graders because they think they know it all, but then they still make room for you to bring part of yourself, but then we'll be like, okay, that's enough,
Yes.
bring it down, like
Yes. This
stop.
is our classroom.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I loved teaching those middle grades. When I was subbing, I subbed for a year as a preschool sped assistant. And when students found that out when I was in eighth grade, they were like, however did you teach those little kids? And I said, they're not much different than y'all. I was like, so when
Mm-hmm.
people say, oh my goodness, how could you with those big kids? I'm like, they're not much different than the little kids, and they're not much different than the seniors. So I feel like I got the best of both worlds
Yeah.
teaching in middle grades. I got to see them form and cry and still be vulnerable. And then I got to see them grow up and move into themselves and kind of
Yeah.
blossom. So I feel like middle grades, I got the best of both worlds.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that so you taught for 17 years in the middle grades. A lot of folks that we talk to on the podcast talk about after X amount of years, 4 or 5 years, they become dean or curriculum instruction. Was that a part of your journey, or did you stay in the classroom for those 17 years?
I stayed in the classroom. I always thought, and forgive me if you are in administration now, I always thought that administration was the enemy, or those things were like the
Listen.
antithesis
Yeah.
of teaching. Like I felt like you had to lose a part of like the thing that I loved about teaching in
Mm-hmm.
order to go into those things. So that never was something I that was I never envied those people, never even considered going into that route because being proximate to kids was really important to me.
Yeah. So I think I don't normally ask this, but seeing how you were in the classroom for such a long period of time and definitely honored that, are there tips that you would want to give to educators, especially at our first couple years teaching middle school that you've learned over those 17 years that could really help them to build relationship in the classroom, to get those students who are hesitant to learn because of whatever traumas in previous grades, get them motivated? Anything you want to share with those folks?
That's a great question. And I think one of the things that I learned that sustained me for so long was that we are teaching each other. Like we are teaching and learning from each other. So one of the things that I'm most proud about when I was a middle grades classroom was actually not allowing students, that's not the right word, but inviting students to be co-teachers with me. So I
Mm.
opened up the curriculum. I said, hey, come in on your lunch. I will bring snacks for you, and let's look at the next unit. And I need y'all's help in telling me how we're going to make this better and more aligned to what you want. So I would have groups. I called them they were like my focus group, but they end up becoming like my co-captains, co-teachers. And what was in it for them is they didn't have to take the final assessment. They helped me write the assessments. They helped me
Yeah.
like formulate and retool things. Like, so I'm not into gaming. That's just not who I am as a person. But they were like, before there was talk about gamifying things, they were like,
Hmm.
we need to gamify this. Like, this is boring. I don't want to read, the students don't want to read just this. But also they would be like, they need to do this. This is some work they need to do. Like they were sometimes I
Sure.
had to I was like, whoa, fall back. Like
We
they
can
don't
be
have to
very.
do.
I feel like the kids get more intense sometimes than the
Yes.
teachers. Yeah.
Yes, they were like, no, this is an important assignment. And I'm like, okay, why is this an important assignment? So but also it helped me understand my students so much more. Like to be able to be in to have that relationship where they understood that I am teacher, but you are also teacher. And we're going to
Yeah.
do this together. And I trust you enough that I'm going to open up this curriculum that you might not have ever seen before and say, what can we change? What can we develop together? And I think that really catapulted my relationship with students. That really, like, I had a line of students then that wanted to do that. And then when they came back, I always had a lot of students who wanted to come back and visit. When they came back to visit, my caveat was you have to teach a lesson with me, or you have to read during first chapter Fridays. You have to read the first chapter of a book that you love. And so that because then they started to see me like, oh, like a colleague. Like
Sure.
I'm invested in this just as much as my teacher is. So I would just say develop those types of rapports that those students in your classroom are potential educators
Hmm.
and should be your co-teachers. This is their education. And sometimes we tend to forget that as teachers.
Yeah, I was reading your bio and you were teacher of the year for your state. Is that correct?
Well, I was Illinois History Teacher of the Year, and then I
Yeah.
was National Council for Teachers of English Middle Grades Educator of the Year nationally
So,
for
folks,
English.
you listening to some wisdom here. I hope you wrote that down, right? We're not just out here throwing out this. No, this is gems, okay? And I do want to hear about that. I think I remember a part of this story that, but I do. Yeah, I wanted you to share like what that experience was like for you. I know there's so many Black educators, period, but Black educators like strive for that type of recognition,
Hmm.
for the work that they do. And I say they because I'm no longer in the classroom. But at that time, I remember our district having teacher of the year, and I was in that district for 12 years. We didn't have a Black teacher of the year the whole time that I was in the school district. But yeah, tell us. Of course, we want to hear about that experience, and then obviously you're not in education in that particular sense anymore. We want to hear more about that. But yeah, tell us about that experience. What that was like for you.
Well, I started needing avenues outside of, educate you. It's so easy in education sometimes when you're in a box to think that you're crazy. I don't know who I'm talking to, but you could like be in a classroom and you're trying inventive things and people around you are like what are they doing? You're like, I must be losing my mind.
Yeah.
So I started to really, it was Twitter, actually. Oh, how I missed the Twitter that it used to be,
Yeah.
that I branched out into and started just being involved in Twitter chats. And that really evolved first of all, it enabled me to be a part of a community that was thinking differently about education and what was important in the classroom. So, in my district, what books we taught were important. And then I go on to Twitter, and that's not what's important. That is the students are the curriculum. And so, like, it just changed my perspective. And so I
Can I
started to,
pause you?
sure,
Yeah, did you hear yourself? The students are the curriculum. I just had to pause you on that.
the students are the curriculum.
I I love that so much. Continue. Sorry to cut you off.
Yes.
Continue.
No, no,
Continue.
no, no, no. Um, and I believe that, and I still believe that in my current role, which we'll talk about. But the I started to just branch out and be part of different organizations and different learning opportunities for myself. So one of those was National Council for Teachers of English. A friend invited me to their conference, and I was like, "Oh, I found my people." And then another organization that was vital to my growth and development was the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History. And being part of that organization, somebody nominated me for History Teacher of the Year through the Gilder Lehrman Institute. And so I won for my state, and I was so incredibly proud of that because first of all, it wasn't me seeking a nomination for myself, it was someone else nominating me. And also, it required that, oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Um, it was the nomination process also included other educators and students writing on your behalf. And
Okay,
so
yeah.
then to win that, I don't know, to win both of those, because the National Council for Teachers of English was also a pretty stringent process where other educators, parents, as well as students had to write um, on your behalf. But I was just so incredibly proud of that. And I remember coming back to my district and, like, oh my goodness, I have won this thing, and crickets,
Mm.
crickets, crickets in my building. I remember, thinking, oh, surely my principal will say something at the next faculty meeting, or there'll be a shout out in the principal's newsletter. And not that I needed that, but sometimes you want
Yeah,
a
we want
little,
our
like,
flowers. We want our
yes, you
flowers. It's
want a
for our
little
kids that we did
something.
this. Yes.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
I just remember, and this is how I knew it was like time to leave that space. My principal wrote about a teacher who had gotten a grant for playground equipment, and not that that wasn't, not playground equipment, for picnic tables for outside, and not that that wasn't great. And I think that that is awesome to have that for the school. But as I looked down looking for any mention of my name anywhere in there, there was nothing. And that's when I was like, okay, you have, um, this isn't a place where you can grow anymore. And for a long time, when I told that story, I would tell it from the perspective of like, I left because of them, and I didn't leave because of the administration. I left because I, I had outgrown, not because of anything
Yeah.
they did to push me away, but the things that I had done to prepare myself to grow to another level.
Did you always see it that way?
I didn't. When I first left, I was embittered when I first left because also while I was ready to leave the classroom to a certain level, I don't think I was ready. So I felt
Mm,
at that point a little pushed out, right? And so it was like, yeah, you're because you haven't recognized who I am and what I bring, now I have to find another space. Instead of thinking, yeah, but you were putting things in position, things that you needed to grow and evolve in position for a couple of years. And so you weren't going to be able to grow in that space. And so you needed to evolve out of that space. So it's been a shift. And I finally been able to kind of release some of that bitterness. And now, if I
mm-hmm.
saw the principal on the street, I wouldn't have a few choice words for her anymore. I would be able to
Yeah.
let it go.
I think I think it's really interesting. I had Kwame Sarfo-Mensah on, and I think he's
Yes,
NCTE. Yes, he said
yes,
that
yes.
he wrote a book when he was
Learn to
teaching.
relearn. Yeah.
Yeah, he so his new book is out, but he was talking about on my show same question like what was it that helped you decide it was time to go, that he had written his first book, I believe it was his first book, and other schools bought the book. He got a lot of accolades
Mhm.
from other people in community, but his principal said nothing. Same situation where the person that he thought was going to, at least like you said in the newsletter or
Yes.
something, nothing, right?
Yep.
Crickets.
Crickets. Yep.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I hope to have Dr. Mary Hemphill on, and she also talks about this, like how we grow past where we are
Mhm.
in our space. And I want to point that out, and I also want to point out this bitterness. And that's such a real thing. I had the reason the podcast exists is because of my own experience being pushed out of education, and I just saw my principal this summer for the first time in 6 years, and I had
Mm.
no choice words.
See, and that's how you know.
Yeah, and that's how you know. For me, it was how I knew I was healed,
Yes.
because I saw her, and it just I am so much in a better place than I
Yes.
was, and I flourish, and they could not
Yes.
contain the brilliance that I am.
Eh,
Right
Yep.
yeah, and 6 years ago I would have not said that. We would have been in the Walmart between the aisles, right? Right?
Yes. Yes. I
Yeah,
would have
but
been
now,
scrapping. I would have been
yes,
scrapping.
yes. And so to see her and then just like walk past her and just have no feeling, go take my daughter because I was going to summer camp, drop my daughter for summer camp, drive off. Um, it was such a wonderful feeling, and so I just want to say for those of us out here who are feeling pushed out and in that space of still healing and trying to find wellness, I feel like time does help that, and I feel like for some of us therapy too, but that's just a little piece of it. But thank you for sharing that part of your story.
Yeah. I think it's important. And I also think it's important that shift that I came to, that it
Yeah.
wasn't that somebody pushed me out. It was just that I grew out.
Period. Period. The box just couldn't contain you.
Mhm.
And you know, I've said this before that I had a mentor who had this calendar on her wall, and we were talking about me leaving education, And I was starting my doctoral program, and she's like, you know, it's going to be the doctoral program is probably going to be difficult. Just stay here, stay here. And the poster or the calendar said, everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Mm.
And I knew it was time to go,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, so and that's that's a whole different episode, but thank you for that. And so on that same vein, then thinking about your own work, thinking about the ways that you've had impact nationally, probably internationally with young folks for 17 some odd years, what do you think that schools and districts and unions can do, and even folks in higher ed, because you're in higher ed now, can do to keep Black educators, Black professors, school psychologists, and so on?
I, while I was still at that school, like the one of the last years, I was a part of a teaching policy organization, and I wrote a white paper with some colleagues about recruiting and retaining teachers of color. And one of the things that we advocated for was affinity spaces and racial literacy training. And I think that those things are still salient and important. And I know that based on what we wrote, the state of Illinois um, got some money, and for the past 3 years now, have with state funding implemented affinity spaces for teachers of color across the state of Illinois, which have seen amazing results in terms of those folks who are in a part of the affinity spaces, who are retaining those teachers who are in their building, which is hard during these past couple of years of quarantine and teaching online and
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature, as well as being a space of wellness for teachers. So I
Yes.
think those affinity spaces are critically important. And at those affinity spaces, we fought really hard to ensure that those affinity spaces were just spaces of rest and peace and respite, and that they weren't required to do. So when they
Yeah.
were first organized, they were like, okay, well, what policies can you bring? Wait, no, wait, no, 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 no. You're not going to ask us to do the work that should be done on our behalf.
Yeah.
This should be a space, if we so choose to do that work, then we can. But this should be a place of respite. This should be water in the desert for folks. And so I think that those affinity spaces are important. I think it's also important to just have listening. And I don't, in this, and after this week, I know that there will be these conversations about pulling back on spaces like that and conversations like the ones that happen in those affinity spaces. But I think it's critically important that we fight that, that we speak truth to power, and that we force places to listen, and not just listen but act, because if we have learned anything since the pandemic, people can listen all they want, but if they choose not to do anything with it, it's for naught.
Yes,
So what
exactly.
does it mean to listen to Black folk, and what, especially Black women? I'm just going to shout out Black women, like specifically. What does it
Yeah.
mean to listen to Black women? Because we've been told you. We have nursed this nation, we have nursed this world, and so you can't nourish off us and then not do the things that enact the wisdom that we have given you. And so, what does it mean to listen to us and then to engage in the practices and wisdom that we bestow so graciously upon you?
Yeah.
And also to consider, and you know this all too well, our own well being. So, what does it mean to also then take a rest? Like my husband had to tell me this week, girl, get off the internet
Yeah.
and take a rest. And then that last thing that I learned as part of that policy group was just implementing racial literacy. As a nation, as a world, really, we are racially illiterate, and I think that we see that over and over again in the even in the policies that are enacted by the current administration. And that racial literacy means that we are learning about each other and the history that goes behind that. I was just learning, I know this is like a little sidebar, but it's so important to me as a
Go
former
for
history
it.
teacher.
Yeah.
I'm listening right now to Michael Harriot's Black History AF. And I am learning, like just learning. And I just finished a chapter on Haiti. And now I'm a history teacher, y'all. I'm a history teacher. And some of the knowledge dropped about the Haitian Revolution and the nuances of that learning is in itself racial literacy that then undergirds everything. So if I think that the Haitian Revolution is just about enslaved people rising up, or that Haiti's current view in the world is just because of that, then I am missing so much more of the
Mm.
story. And so I think when we have racial literacy, the story comes in full view. And I think that that's what we have been missing.
There's a theme across this interview that I want to point out for folks who are maybe missing it, which is that you cannot leave your education as an educator in the hands of your district or your administrator. Keisha's talked about going on Twitter, joining organizations, reading books. And if you believe, especially in our first couple of years, some of us are so excited, we just want to do right and please. And if we don't step out and say, like, there's more, there has to be more to this, and continually, consistently speak, speak up, but also to read up, to write up, to think up, we're going to be in a place of just shock continually, right? And I want people to hear that because that's how we outgrow the box. It's from the gathering of knowledge. And I know that that's for some people. It's like, well, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to. It's like if we have to think about expansion beyond like a loss of job. We have to continually grow our knowledge base, and it's so important. And I'm speaking of first years, 30th years, right? We have to continue to take care of our brain and our wellness. I love this affinity group space and that you spoke about the wellness piece because when we get excited about affinity spaces, the first thing we want to do is like, let's go and look through all the handbooks and let's try to disrupt. And it's like, no, people are exhausted. Can we talk about wellness? Can we come up with strategies to be well? Can we talk about community care? Can we make sure that our 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 eating and our wellness and our mental health is good? Right? We don't want to sit down and pile through policy on our time off,
Hmm.
right?
Sometimes I just
No.
want to talk in dialect that is comfortable to me with
Period.
people who understand it. Sometimes that's
Yeah.
just what I want to do. And so why can't I have that space to do that with colleagues, right? Because I can do that with friends, I can
Yeah.
do that with family, but why can't I do that with colleagues?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that so much. And I so badly want to call you Dr. Keisha. I had to double
Speak it
check to
into
see.
existence. Speak it into existence. I'm on that journey, so I need that
Yes.
encouragement.
Yes. And so I think our next question is like one of my favorite questions is there a black teacher? And you kind of talked about this a little bit, but is there a black teacher or teachers, educators that you would like to shout out?
Yes. So Auntie Anne, first and foremost. And then my so when I think of educators, I don't think of it in a traditional sense. And I've written about this a number of times. Like the living room floor of my grandparents' home was my first classroom.
Yeah.
It's where my grandfather was talking about Bear Rabbit. It was where we heard stories about our ancestors and our history. So, shout out to my grandparents who made sure that we knew who we were and that we were secure and confident in who we were. And my parents for continuing that legacy that I can now continue with my own children. And then one of my college professors, who was one of those professors who told me, girl, you are taking over my classroom. You just need to teach. And that was, and he passed away a couple of years ago, but Dr. Henry Blackwell from Boston College. I remember being in his classroom, and it was the first classroom in this predominantly white institution, Jesuit institution, and I have to say this too because I think this might be germane to some people. I was a mom at 19, so I was going to school with a baby, had transferred, had left Illinois and moved to Boston with a young child and was pursuing education at this Jesuit university that I didn't feel like I belonged at with a baby who I was like, oh my goodness, how am I doing this and this? And it was the first classroom where I felt seen. It was
Yeah.
the first classroom where I just felt like, ooh, I can say what I want to say, and if there's not going to be any retribution to what I say. There is going to, the way he just looked at me and nodded his head, I was like, ah, ah. Or
Hmm.
when he calls me, hey, I need you to come to office hours and talk me through some things, and not like he's it really, because I'm thinking I'm on point saying some stuff, and he didn't correct me in the classroom. He was like, okay, so let me tell you what you let's talk about what you said. Think
Yeah.
about it from this perspective. What about this, Keisha? Have you really thought about this? And just challenged me, and so those were like deeply philosophical, like learning opportunities that I just love. So I'm so thankful, and I hope that I am just 1/10 of the type of professor to my students that he was to me.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, all right. Well, what are you doing now? Right? You're no longer a middle grades educator, but you're still out in community, definitely, and in higher ed. So let's hear all the things that you're up to. We'd love to hear that. And you've written articles,
Yes.
so we want to talk about that too. So yeah.
Yes. I am I'm going to talk about the thing that I'm really excited about right now. And it's going to sound a little weird, but after Beyonce's Cowboy Carter album came out last year, some of my colleagues and I work at a Hispanic serving institution in Illinois. So I transitioned from middle grades teacher to higher ed because I was looking for a space that was really aligned to what my new vision of teaching and learning was. So I'd done that policy work on recruiting and retaining teachers of color, and found that there was one of my friends was working in a university in Chicago, that one of their pillars was to get more teachers of color in the classroom. And I was like, okay, I'm in. Pay cut, I'm in. Like, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And so went to that university, which is a minority serving institution and a Hispanic serving institution, and have found it refreshing to now be able to say, okay, the thing that I wrote about, I am now helping to bring to fruition. What does it mean to
Yes.
bring more teachers of color into the profession? And so that's like super gratifying for me. But so my colleagues and I was talking to some Black women that I work with and was like, hey, we're at this Hispanic serving institution, and I was listening to Beyonce's lyrics, and it spoke to me about belonging in certain spaces. It talked to me about inventing spaces and then being kind of severed from those spaces that you invented. And so we started doing research on what is Black belonging in Hispanic serving institutions, specifically
Yes.
for Black women.
Yes.
And so we have started some research and are doing some conferences and doing some writing about what that looks like. Because what we found is that, and I'm going to go back to this, um, this nation, this world has suckled off the breast of Black women, quite literally, and then discarded them when they felt like they were no longer necessary. And so we were starting to feel that at our
Yes.
institution, that our voices weren't mattering as much, that even though we were pressing and saying, this needs to be done, justice looks like this, belonging looks like this, inclusion looks like this, that sometimes we felt like who we were was being tamped down and pushed to the side. So we're like, okay, let's look at this specifically in Hispanic serving institutions, and let's bring this conversation to others. So that's what I'm really excited about right now.
Yeah.
I continue to just write. My book came out, The Anti-Racist English Language Arts Teacher, in 2024. And I
Congratulations
continue.
on that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
And I continue to do work with districts and colleges, are doing book studies, and there have been it has been adopted as required text in classes, and I continue to speak to students and educators about that text and why, even times like this, it's important to press on with that anti-racist work and do that in collaboration with students. I think when I think about my book, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that book wasn't just me. That book was done in collaboration with over 100 teachers. I interviewed numerous over 50 teachers individually, and their words and their ideas appear in the book. It's a collectivist work, and the climax of that book is student voice. So I interviewed
Yes.
8 students, and their voices appear in that text, and what anti-racist education in an English class means to them. And I will give everybody a little seed. It is not The Great Gatsby. It is not the text. It is in the heart of the conversations and how those conversations are able to evolve and change hearts and minds. And students see, when almost down to the student that I talk to, they see that there is this push to quell their own interest in anti-racism and racial literacy, and they are screaming that they want it and they need it. And
Yes.
the students that I talk to are of different ages, of different racial makeups and cultural makeups, and so I think it's important to listen to them.
Fantastic. I this the idea of student voice, I can't imagine why people forget or choose to forget to incorporate student voice in the work that they do,
Hmm.
right? And obviously, again, this is going back to what you said about being in the classroom and the students helping you to teach and co-teaching with you, right? You don't have to, if you're listening to this and you don't have a book or you're not writing a book, you can do that in your classroom, in your community
Absolutely.
space, in the places that you worship. If you teach youth, like Sunday schools and things like that, or YMCA's or Girls Inc., like how do we incorporate our youth voice in everything that we do? Um, because for some of us, including myself, I haven't been a youth in a minute, right? So how are we supposed to know without asking them? And I also want
It's
to talk about
erasure. It's erasure
a
if you
hundred
don't.
percent it is erasure. And I also want to say like stop and think about this part about what it means to be in a Hispanic serving institution as a black person and the anti-blackness that we experience in that space, right? Jaleesa Evans was on the show a while back, and she does work in California around like anti-blackness and brown spaces, and we have to recognize that because when we say we have diversity here, right, and we kind of clump the BIPOC as if we all have the same experience, we're doing a disservice
Exactly.
for black folks and black women in particular. So I'm glad that you said that because we don't talk about anti-blackness in our retention efforts. We just
Absolutely.
don't talk about that, and we should talk about that more. So folks, make sure to pick that book up. um, yeah, and I think that so you work with schools and districts. We didn't say this, but how can people find you?
You can find me through my website. It is www.keisharembert.com, and you will find some of the things that I have done and a link to contact me.
Yeah, thank you. In the same vein, and I wanted to make sure I said that before we get to this other conversation. Again, we're a week into after inauguration, and we're seeing that at the federal level, the erasure of DEI, and the trickle down for Target and with these other organizations and Costco saying no, we're going to stand 10 toes down.
Mhm.
And thinking about the work that you do and the work that I do, I want to ask you, what is the conversation like first in your own head, but in communities where you are doing DI with other women, other Black women? What are people saying and thinking about far as we're trying to plan going forward, what this could be for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many conversations happening. Like if y'all saw my text stream, it's blowing up because we're checking on each other too. And I think after the election, there was a need to just take a breath, to take a collective breath and to say, yeah, I need a rest. I can't do it all. I've tried. And like, I think because the fight was like, we're fighting so hard.
Yeah,
So the rest was required. And I think the conversation now, especially with DEI practitioners and individuals, and we talked about this earlier before the recording, is just that this isn't the end of our work. This is actually the beginning of our work.
absolutely.
This actually shows the necessity of our work and the especially education. So what I'm finding, especially as I watch the news and listen to folks, people really need to be educated on what justice, diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion is, because it is more clear to me than ever that people have no clue what those things mean. To I keep, especially when I watch the news, this idea that that those things somehow DEI means that you don't have the most qualified person in there when Black women are the most educated demographic in this country and one of the fastest growing business in terms of business owners in this country. So to think that our value is only in the color of our skin is just crazy to me. So I think it's an opportunity to educate. It's also an opportunity to collaborate,
Yeah,
to be in community with other folk. So it is an opportunity to have conversations in the Latinx community about anti-Blackness. It is an opportunity to talk in the Asian community about how we can coalesce and how without the civil rights movement, there wouldn't be space for a number of folk. I think that collaboration and pressing in and teaching, like fundamental teaching,
yeah,
is where is what's blowing up in my chat right now. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, what are we hearing, and then what does that mean? What do we need? And I'm gonna go back to Kwame. Like, what needs to be unlearned
yes.
from what I am hearing, and how do we do that?
I want to ask a follow up question to that. In that same chat, are people talking about rest?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. A big part of it is rest. Like giving each other permission to say, like, you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yeah,
And I think you need right now, like being able to tell some of my friends, like, it's okay. Like, it's okay if you just want to sit this out right now.
yeah,
If you want to just rest right now, that is absolutely fine. Like you need to do that. That's what I think I'm hearing from you, and that's what needs to happen. I think that is, yeah, our chats are all about rest and about not resting. My therapist told me something. that was really important to me, that rest isn't the absence of doing things. It is taking, rest is also taking, oh goodness, how did she say it? I won't say it as eloquently as she did, but removing things. So it is removing things that are
Yeah.
causing me stress.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not getting at the heart of, I'm not gonna Sharon, I'm sorry I didn't get it right. I'm gonna have
Sharon,
to. We'll talk to you in our next session about
yeah.
it. But it was about strategic removal. So it wasn't. I think we think of rest sometimes as, oh, I'm going to go take a bubble bath, and it wasn't that. It was strategic removal of things that bring stress.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon, for that. Shout out to you doing the good work because I know your
Yes.
books are blowing up at this point. um, so, our last question in that same vein is for you, what does it mean to be well?
Ooh, to be well. You even gave me that question in advance, and I'm still pondering that. To be well means to be attuned to self, um, and to be attuned not to what everybody needs from me, but what I need from myself. And so to tap into that authenticity so so when I'm there and I'm visualizing it almost as like a space in my gut when I know that I am well and full and okay with self, that wellspring comes. Like then I can help others. Like then when I am safe and secure in my authentic self, and sometimes that's just being quiet. Sometimes that's in the reading of great text like Michael Harriot's. Sometimes it's giggling with my adult children. Um, Sometimes it's just being in company and listening to young people, because that's also a space of hope for me when I am just
Hmm.
listening to young people. The older I get, the more valuable it becomes for me to be in space with young people. And so I think that's what it means to be well, to be in, and all of that boils down to being in community, whether that's
Yes.
being well within myself enough that I can glean from the energy that others are bringing to me.
Yeah, I love that. For someone who didn't have much time to think about it, I feel like that
Oh,
was beautiful.
thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah. And this attunement to self is just so important. The type of person who becomes an educator is also the type of person who's like overworking and trying to show up and making and like a lot of self sacrificing. And so when we leave these spaces that will very gladly take every drop, we have to kind of retrain ourselves to give to self
Absolutely.
first. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like
And
slow down.
that authenticity of self, I find
Yes.
is
Yes.
like so important. I have for so long, my voice has been a parrot of some other entity or some other space. And the older I get and the more sound I am in self, I'm hearing my own voice. And she is a powerful thing. She is a powerful thing.
I'm going to end the show with that. All right, folks. Thank you for coming and listening to the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. All of the information that we have talked about in the show is going to be in the show notes. Read the articles, listen to the things, do all the things, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace.